Hey everybody, welcome to Tabletop for Two. So in this episode, we're going to be talking about some creative character types and PC tweaks that you can make for your one-on-one games to make them more fun and exciting. So we are your two hosts. I'm Beth Ball. This is my husband, Jonathan, and we are the two writers behind D&D Duet. Super fun to see friends in chat. Hello, everybody. We're really happy that you're here. If you're joining us later on YouTube or watching the recording on Twitch, we're super happy that you're here too.
Hey, Pink Sparkles. Hey, Zeke. So today, in addition to thanking our lovely folks in the stream chat, we also have to thank our wonderful, amazing patrons. Our patrons make all of our video content possible and breathe life into all of our creative work, and we're so appreciative for them. If you want to check out our Patreon, you can join them over at at patreon.com/GroveGuardianPress, where our patrons enjoy a monthly adventure and NPC and magical item and map and all the good stuff. We're in the middle of a super fun run right now, exploring Stymorod, the land of vampires.
So, what are we talking about tonight, honey?
Well, tonight we're going to be talking about different kinds of characters that you might want to include in your next duet game, and how alignment, but maybe not necessarily the kind of alignment that we're used to thinking about with D&D, plays a special role in how we've had success, at least with our characters in our game. As well as some special tweaks that you might want to make to your characters, your stable of characters, to make things run a little smoother. We messed around with a lot of different things before we found something that we are really happy with. As far as like, how are the characters going to run? Who's going to do what? What does that look like? So we'll talk about more of that towards the end. But yeah. What kinds of characters tend to show up in our duets?
Can I add a caveat really fast before we say that? Okay, so depending on the thing that we're talking about, I think it varies between like best practice in terms of what works for us versus things to try, stuff that we're kind of just putting out that we think will be really fun. And especially the first part of this, what we're hoping for, or at least I'll say one of the things I'm hoping for is that it will give you some ideas of characters to bring into your duet games, as well as some ways to kind of personalize them so that they'll be interesting to the PC. If you're feeling nervous about DMing, like we talked about switching DM and player a little bit on episode 2, if you're feeling a little bit worried about that, one of the things that really helped me when I was first starting to DM was coming at it through the perspective of a character and figuring out what they would do. So that way it was kind of maintaining it was almost like I was still the player, even though I was the DM, but I was still coming at it from like, I'm going to be this character and they're going to lead the PC through these various things. So it doesn't have to be this big, huge, big, huge thing that you are managing like 20 different characters for. You can keep it really simple or try out a bunch of different things. So it's kind of a part of it, at least for this, is playing around with what works for you and maybe just tossing some things in, seeing what works out.
Could you talk more about what you mean by approaching DMing like through the lens of a character, and maybe give an example of what that looked like in our game?
Yeah. So I was really nervous about how to set up like a narrative that would be open enough for your PC to have flexibility to move around in. And, I get, okay, we're going to go to this place and there's going to be a monster there. You're going to fight them. Yay. Then you're going to go to this other place. Maybe there are more monsters there. But I wanted there to be more of a story element to it. And so the way that I figured out to do that, a couple of times I accidentally made villains when I wasn't necessarily. The first time I wasn't trying to. The second time I was.
Are you talking about Darcy?
Darcy, Avariel, and Fainara. Just characters that he hated, or his PCs hated. So it was easier for me to think, that you hated too.
No, I loved hating them.
Character do, and we'll talk about them in a second.
Okay.
Sorry, I love hating. Well, I loved being them too. I'm trying to answer your question, and then I got sidetracked. Okay. What does this person want? Whenever we are any character, we want to think about their motivation, and how does them connecting with the PC, how does their relationship with the PC help them further their goals? And so then just thinking about it from the perspective of this one character and the power structure that they're involved in was kind of how I approached planning for that session. So in this person's ideal world, twisting their evil mustache, part A of the plan, part B of the plan, part C of the plan. How does it work? And then without having a solution, I just had an evil person scheme that kept it open enough for you to do whatever you wanted.
And that's really what we were talking about when we're talking about the alignment, but maybe not the way that you expect in a conversation about D&D to work. Because is so many of the characters are kind of maybe literally live or die, but they're going to be in the game to the degree or in the role that I'm saying this more complicated than I need to, but what are their motivations in relation to the characters or the party's motivations? And I really like that in interesting, complex games, the same NPC and their motivations can really change and vary a little bit. And that to me is always more interesting than, is this character good or is this character evil? It's much more interesting. Is this evil character maybe have the same goals and motivations and yen to do something that the player does? Or maybe this good character that they should like and they know they should be on board with, maybe their motivations are antithetical to the players. It gives you another lever to kind of mess with and adjust.
Because every person, or almost every person at least, is the hero of their own story. They're the protagonist. They think that they're doing the right thing or what needs to be done. However, off the characters or people in real life feel about it. And Thanos in The Avengers is one of my favorite examples of that, because he thinks that he's doing the right thing. He's a visionary. He's the only one brave enough to kill half the world's population to save it, to wipe out half of the people and beings in the universe. Nobody else has the power or is willing to use it. And so he's the hero to him. To everyone else, what his plan is horrifying, but that doesn't matter. It's in his perspective, it's his story. And so we want that for, it's a lot to say, you should have that for every single person they're meeting. The shoe salesman, the cobbler, he's the hero, the carpenter.
They get the crap out of these shoes. Oh.
So that can get a lot to manage pretty fast. So we can, are you making that, did you hit your hand or are you making that sound as the carpenter?
Yes, I hit my hand imitating the carpenter.
Then the carpenter busts his thumb. How is he going to continue his mission of bringing beautiful shoes to the world?
It's in jeopardy, but it aligns with the party's goals, so it's probably going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Boom, side
really
quest.
Quickly before... Eddie. Really briefly before we get into the alignment of goals in terms of what the party wants and what everybody else wants, can you go over, in case somebody is new, what alignment generally means in D&D?
Oh yeah, sure. So usually it's set up on a 3x3 grid, and on one axis you'll have evil, neutral, and good. So how mustache-twistingly evil in service of dark beings usually are you? And on the other end, how much in service of good-aligned concepts of wholesomeness and goodness are you? I think oftentimes that it's less about like good gods and bad devils, but it seems to be more about how how out for yourself you are versus how selfless you are, which I think is interesting because if you read any of the descriptions of, you know, evil in the published campaigns, typically it's, you know, this person is out for themselves, out for collecting their own power, or they're in service to some dark deity, ostensibly so that they can grow more powerful, right? Versus the good ones are giving and self-sacrificing and connected with others. I just think that's interesting. And then on the other axis, going the other way, it's a scale of chaotic to neutral to lawful. So how likely are you to play within the rules? And I think that it's really interesting the kinds of rules that we're talking about. Are we talking about like a city's rules, a society's rules? Are we talking about rules of basic morality? Are we talking about hygiene, right? Like, there are all kinds of different ways to be chaotic and all kinds of different ways to follow rules and follow law. And so within those, they kind of make a 3x3 grid ranging from chaotic evil who doesn't play by any rules and is only serving themselves or evil, all the way to lawful good. So you're following all the rules and you're just, you know, bright halo. If this was Fable, you'd have a halo and you'd have butterfly flying around your head. Your eyes would be glowing white. So that's kind of alignment, how we usually talk about it in D&D.
Thank you. Okay, so do you want to talk about the alignment of goals and NPCs?
I do, in the sense that I think it's interesting to think about. I mean, characters, to me at least, my preference is that it's less about, you know, if they're where they fall on an alignment chart, like are they chaotic evil or if they're lawful good. It's how aligned their goals are with the parties. But I think this is especially important in one-on-one games because part of the magnificence of getting to play a one-on-one game of D&D is that you get to completely cater the story around one player. It really is. They literally are the hero of the story. Kind of in contrast to how everybody else sees themselves as the hero of the story. Quite literally, the PC in a duet game is the hero. And so I think it becomes that much more important to consider how the various NPCs and, you know, different characters that they might meet fit into or out of the PC's goals. Like, it'd be interesting to, I don't know, things can be, I guess, more focused and you can get deeper with one PC than you can, I think, with a table of PCs. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think so too. I do think that it's important for the player to be kind of owning what their character wants, but I think that you can almost necessarily get deeper into what it is that this person is trying to achieve because the storyline does revolve around them. They're Katniss Everdeen, they're not Frodo. Because if we look at Lord of the Rings, like, we can be Frodo, we can be Aragorn, like it shifts whose perspective are we in. Like, you're in charge as the PC, and you know, the hero's journey kind of lives or dies by you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what we mean with alignment here is what does the PC want? What mission are they on? Kind of what's their purpose? And as well as we assume that they'll have at least one person or being adventuring with them. So that's usually the DMPC or the GMPC. So we encourage, in order to increase the amount of interaction that you're able to have, as well as the amount of world immersion that you're able to have PCs and duet games wandering around with the DMPC, whether you run them as a full character, whether you're using a stat block, whether you set them up as a sidekick, whether they're your wolf companion, however you want that to be. And The Witcher is really one of my favorite examples. The newest version of it on Netflix is one of my favorite examples of this, because when we watch Geralt, for example, he always has someone to interact with. He's not talking to himself, and that's how we figure out what's going on inside of his head. He's having a conversation with Roach for apparently no reason, but then, oops, I just forgot her name. Renfrey. Then Renfrey shows up and is like, "Who are you talking to?"
Roach. Also, Garrett is always the inspiration for all of my character voices, so now everybody knows I can only do one voice. And I mean, like, that's why Dandelion is so cool too, right? Because they have this great exchange, and like, there's no real reason for Geralt to have Dandelion coming along with him, but it makes it so much more interesting and fun.
Yeah, but they're cute together, and they're kind of best friends.
Oh yeah,
if not,
definitely. And that was a breakthrough for us too, right? Like when we figured out, oh, we need somebody for the main character to talk to, because otherwise they're running around for no reason.
Yeah. Well, and it's hard for me, at least. It was hard for me to develop my PC just inside of my head, because she's like, okay, my short sword and stab this person. Great. Okay, we just keep going. Instead of somebody asking her things like about herself. So that interaction helped me get to know her.
Definitely. And so then, I mean, like, you have your wonderful traveling companions that can be aligned with the character, various patrons and mentors and guides, friendly NPCs, all can fall into that character category. And then, of course, on the opposite side, going hard the opposite side, your BBEG, Big Bad Evil Guy.
Which is...
and they're obviously going to be working directly opposed to the party, and I like thinking about them as, I don't know, and you can think about really all these characters is like, how long are they going to be sticking around in the campaign? Is this like a one session? Is this a one shopkeeper interaction, or are we talking like, I got plans for this guy? And so I think the more that the character is going to be sticking around, that's when knowing their motivations is definitely more important. And the more nuance you can bring to their motivations, it gets more and more important.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, so if we think of it as a spectrum of the party's goals, this is what they want. This is what direct opposition to them would look like. There's going to be plenty of places in the middle where someone's kind of goals or plans could be, and that's going to shift along the short and long term as well. So there was a time in our home game where our characters were on a mission from a pit fiend, because they kind of had to make this tough choice, and that kind of aligned with what they were trying to do on a larger scale. In some ways, it felt like, because things hadn't gone quite right, that they didn't have all the choice in the world. And I say that as like, sometimes you have to make the best bad decision, and those can be really, really cool situations. You want your heroes to be in those kinds of things, or like you're between a rock and a hard place, whichever phrase you want to use.
Yeah,
it's fine.
I love when like the characters' goals and their values, like it's like the value. I love it when the values stand in the way of the most expeditious way for them to achieve their goals. That's where we have some really cool character moments, and like those tough decisions. Like D&D ultimately is a game about making decisions and seeing how those play out. And the more hand wringing that has to be done before that decision is made, you're doing it right. If it's a fun decision, if it's, unless it's like, do I cast Magic Missile or Fireball Bolt? Just, pick one.
Both.
I like too that with thinking about it. You were touching on this a little bit, but can you think of a time where that alignment shifted, and like we've had characters that were considered enemies end up being allies, or vice versa, enemies that are allies that turn into enemies in our games?
Yeah. So one of my favorites was her name is Fafina. But so she was someone that I set up as an NPC who was temporarily aligned with the party in terms of what the party wanted. But once the party, like once they kind of met that first set of goals, Fafina's partner had been taken. And so once the party was no longer willing to kind of help her get him back, they ended up at a cross point. And so she started taking more and more dramatic actions because her goals at that point had hit a misalignment with the parties. And she was very much a like, you're with me or you're against me kind of person, as well as someone who's going to take whatever advantage that she can. And so, knowing our characters, she knew how best to kind of manipulate what they could offer her to try to get what she wanted.
Friends make the most delicious enemies. We'll talk about that some more later too.
Okay. So what about with we touched on patrons, mentors, and guides. How important do you think it is for those characters to help the party find their mission or help clarify it? What are some different things that we can think about when we are setting up those sort of quest giver NPCs?
I think that as in life, right? Um, Mentors and guides and patrons are super important because they do help clarify what we're trying to do and who we're trying to become. And the best ones, I think, challenge us, both in real life and in our games, for our characters to change or confront aspects of ourselves that might be stopping us from growing or becoming everything that we can be. And I mean, that could even result in a situation where a character, you know, is thinking that a mentor or a patron is not working in their best interest, because that confrontation is so could be so painful or dramatic or, you know, undesirable, but ultimately kind of have that great aha moment of realizing that that's what was necessary.
And I think too that question of scale, especially when we're looking at maybe adventurers when they're just getting started, their perspective on the events happening in the world around them is going to be a lot shorter than those who can see the full picture. And so the actions or advice of their guides maybe isn't going to make sense in the short term because that person's not even thinking about the short term. They can kind of see ahead of where our heroes or the party even can see.
So,
And this is one of the things I think is cool with the Wizards of the Coast do a really good job of this with their adventures, where you always have somebody who just kind of mystically swoops in and is like, I have a very divine sense about you. And the PC's like, okay, so I just needed more bread and some rope.
I just need more,
I think
and then I'm ready.
But that sense of being chosen or selected is a really popular trope for a reason. And so they may not come out and tell the PC, I'm helping you so that you can save the world. They might surprise them with that later.
Yeah, can I ask a question? I was thinking about this a little bit where like we have a note about neutral and like should that even be a thing? But what you were talking about with the patrons and especially published adventures and thinking about like published adventures are typically written for a party of people, and I feel like frequently in published adventures we have these NPCs who have their own goals, and question mark, it almost doesn't matter if they are aligned or not aligned with what the PC wants. or what the party's trying to do. It's kind of up to the party, or really up to a good DM and a good table of players to figure out how they fit into what the NPC wants. Because I think a lot of times that's one of the weaknesses to me of like having a large party or having like running published stuff, is that the NPCs have their goals and they're the ones that are, giving the quests. And I don't know, it's not personal necessarily or connected to the characters necessarily. And so they're oftentimes, I'll give you more gold, I'll give you more weapons or something, right? Like, instead of what really drives people is oftentimes not material, So I just wondered if you...
Or like something that they believe in.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so I was just wondering if you had any more thoughts about that.
I think that is easier to manage in a campaign that you're writing yourself. I don't know that it's a one-on-one game versus group game thing. I think it would be possible in either case. We mentioned Critical Role in either episode 1 or 2, but the things that the characters are facing externally in the world tend to be reflections of what they're enduring internally. That's something we see in fiction all the time, that the thing that we're actually relating to when we're super involved in a story is the emotional journey that the protagonist is on. It's just often expressed through the external journey that the protagonist is on. So what forces are they running into that bring up the forces within themselves? And I think that, thinking for me, especially as a player, that's often what I'm working through with my PCs. A villain who's obsessed with power, how does that help me to understand functions and manipulations of power in the wider world? Kind of stuff like that.
We have those themes a lot in our games, don't we?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think those are questions that we are still are kind of trying to figure out and to understand.
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered your question directly, though.
Totally.
Okay. Can we say one other thing on enemies and opposition before we talk about people who are kind of doing their own thing?
Do it.
So another thing that I like to do is have some opposition parties in a particular location, just like I like to have some sort of a guide or helper in a particular location. And that, I think that having some people grounded there who the parties can interact with, it takes careful balancing, because I don't want it to ever be like, we're here to save you, thank goodness we've arrived, because you couldn't have possibly figured this out on your own. Instead of that, how does the party kind of fulfill a unique role or provide the support that this one person is looking for? And so I think that's a nice way to let the hero help another hero and see other people like themselves. And as we've been prepping for this episode, I've been thinking about what would it look like for the party to run into like a rival adventuring party. That would be a really interesting campaign question. I think that would be a lot for one DM to kind of take on all by themselves. Maybe there'd be a cool way everybody could kind of talk to them. Everybody could be two people at once. Not sure.
I mean, you could just have Pokemon style. You have Team Rocket, who's always there to foil or get in the way of Ash catching them all. Collecting them all? I'm not sure. I missed that whole part.
Was catch.
Catch. Yeah. So, like... But I think like a rival adventuring party is a really good opportunity to have like kind of a foil of the main party that you're working with, and I don't know that you would have to make it more complicated than I guess I wouldn't necessarily think about having the PC run their own foil. Stop punching yourself. Stop hitting yourself.
Well, so in our game, you recently introduced Persephone to a group of different heroes that gave her a chance to kind of work with them. But her initial reaction, I just felt it kind of internally when she met a few of them, was like, I don't know.
Yeah.
You seem kind of suspicious to me, or I don't know that I can trust you. What what's your deal? What's driving you? But I thought that was really interesting. It's more cinematic in my head of like this set of kind of group of 5 adventurers on either side, just kind of sizing each other up, and then they decide, to work together to split the forest in half, whatever it is.
Fireball!
I just think it could be kind of cool.
It's a little bit tangential. It's definitely tangential to what we're talking about, but one of those characters, actually 2 of those characters, Kalachja with his siege breaker shield,
Mm-hmm.
and the lady with Lady Ingrid. What was her name?
I was so focused on the owl.
Yeah. I'm going to call her Kierna.
Trina, but it was something like that. It was something like that.
But like I would totally do a one-off with Kierna flying around on Lady Ingrid and Kalachja just trying to dungeon delve or steal stuff. They were so much fun.
I'll try to write that for you. Maybe Lady Ingrid, the owl.
I wanted to set that so they're already in a position where we could totally do that. So you just let me know.
Okay, so you can write that for me.
We'll write it together.
Okay, but back on our thing. So what do you think about, were there any other examples of alignment and misalignment of goals that you wanted to talk about?
I don't think so, but I think on a kind of a closing note with that idea is that having kind of a spicy mixture of all these different kinds of characters that fall, that their goals fall in different kind of spaces on a character's in or out of the characters, in or out of their alignment with the main characters. Is what I'm trying to say. Just gives the DM so many tools in the tool belt and so many different things to kind of pull on or tug, or even the idea of having various kind of representatives of these different groups that we've talked about that can stick around for a shorter or a longer span of time just frees up a lot of space for the DM. Like, it's really nice as a DM who's DMing, multi-hour games every week. I really enjoy how much we've developed the world and how big the cast of characters is, because it gives me more kind of flexibility to insert something into our game.
Thinking of that, what should DMs do if somebody that worked and thought behind, a character that they thought would resonate really well with their player, with the PC, what should they do if that doesn't quite work out? So if an ally or a mentor figure falls flat,
or are taken totally the way that you didn't intend for them to be taken.
Yeah,
that's happened to me on multiple occasions, where I'm like, oh yeah, this guy's going to be kind of aloof, but ultimately he's a good guy. And then I start acting him, and your character just absolutely hates him. I'm going to try to find a way to poison this guy. Like, oh, yes, he's secretly bad. Except it's not a secret because you already hate him, right? Like, I can't tell you how many times the core idea of a character has shifted based on your character's reaction or perception of them. And sometimes I'll stick with it, if it feels worth it to stick with it and kind of have your character realize that maybe their first perception was incorrect. But I would do that more if it was somebody that I'd planned on having stick around for a longer time.
Okay.
But for a short time, sometimes it's better to just go with it.
Okay, so your advice would be to maybe kind of pull back from whatever plans you had for that character, keep their personality, and then lean into whatever the PC is kind of thinking or feeling.
Yeah, and sometimes I've completely trashed a particular character, the concept for them, and then they'll show up again later with a slightly different personality or affect, and be received the way that I had intended. Like,
it's one of Mike Shea's suggestions, isn't it? That you don't throw something out if the party doesn't take it. Just recycle it and present it to them later.
It's a good plan. And it fits with so much, too. Like, oh, they didn't go to the bandit warehouse that you had prepped and you had room descriptions for and stuff like that because they just decided to burn down the village instead because they're crazy, right? You don't toss out that bandit warehouse. That can be a bandit cave next time, or that can be a, whatever it needs to be.
Kinky warehouse.
Yeah. A kinku warehouse. Or a kinky warehouse. Oh.
That would be something else, I feel like.
But, I mean, can we talk about a time where, like, the plans for an NPC totally shifted? Like, what about the first time that I remember that happening super hard in our game was with Jeremy.
Okay.
Tell us.
Well, so that's a kind of unique instance, isn't it? Where my character really liked this PC that you'd kind of put into her path. I didn't know on the other side of the table that he had like a 3-word description.
Literally, town guard number 1, who's very devoted to the town, I think was the description.
And now he's an important character in Land of Vampires. He's had this like whole life after.
Yeah.
I know something about him just really resonated with Braceras, and I thought too, because you go to a place, you meet a person. We went to the place, we hated the first set of people we met, we accidentally burned down their settlement. We go to the second place, this person we meet seems to not hate us, everyone else does.
Yeah, sometimes that's all it takes.
And she was kind of irritated with one of the DMPCs too, so I think that maybe helped.
Like she wasn't interested as much interacting with the DMPC that I had for her to interact with, and so like this other person comes along for her to kind of play against.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
It worked out great.
So what did you decide to do as Jeremy? So like if you put us on the other side of the screen, what did that look like?
I think that, step 1 was kind of realizing how much Braceras was into this random town guard named Jeremy in a fantasy setting.
I'm pretty sure Jeremy is a medieval name. I looked it up.
Oh, I'm sure. It doesn't play well against Braceras.
But I made up that name. It's cool.
But I think try to lean into I guess my strategy was to lean into the things that seemed to be attracting Braceras to him, to like see where that took us.
Mm-hmm.
And then as soon as a PC is attached to somebody, then you are faced with the GM question like, well, good stories aren't made from easy relationships, right? So what's going to complicate things? What's going to be the tension here? Because it'd be a really short session if it was like, well, they met, everything was fine. Do you want to watch a movie? So, and that happened again with Jack. Like I had made this character who was just going to be kind of somebody cool and moody. And they had one piece of information to give you, which was that something was suspicious with the priest. That was it. But for whatever reason, your character just totally latched onto him.
We felt like we had been guided to this place to meet this person, and so...
They were sitting in a tavern that was roughly named after your patron deity.
Wearing all black.
Generally being... You like my characters that are gruff, but straightforward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought it was on purpose. Ooh, Okay, so let's talk about PCs that are more than what they seem. Is that okay?
I love it. Do you have a PC or an NPC that you interacted with that was more than met the eye? What happened there?
Mm-hmm. So our friend Quigley, we found out over time that Quigley was a dragon. And you had foreshadowed this by seeing a dragon kind of randomly in a place where one wouldn't normally be. And then we met Quigley a couple days later, and he's this kind of strange, detached old man.
Yeah, that was, we had to do a total, like, it's one of those, like, wonderful moments where I realized that you can just redo something.
Hmm.
Yeah, because like, the first time you all met
Because his meeting with us was kind of weird.
Yeah, you hated him. And he was being weird, but it's because he had a big secret. But he was so weird and he was so secretive that he was completely unrelatable. And there was like, well, we came all the way out here for no reason. Great. I was like, but I was still a newbie DM too. So I was like expecting you all to like jump on him and like tear down his, because something was weird with the chicken coop. You all found out later that that was the secret entrance to his dragon lair. But you had no reason to poke around in the chicken coop.
I talked to one of the chickens.
You talked to one of the chickens. I
didn't give anything away.
No, it's a chicken. It's like intelligence is -2. But that was a great learning moment. And I mean, since it's a duet, we could just kind of say we talked about it later, figured out what was going on, and then we kind of had a little bit of a redo, and it was much better. Like he came in and apologized.
And said he was too sleepy or something. Yeah. It's fine.
Yeah.
But I think that's something to keep in mind too. So if something feels kind of off in your game, especially if you're gaming with somebody who lives in the same house as you, it's, maybe talk about that with them when tensions are low. So don't like if something goes weird during a session, you're feeling kind of mad, that's probably not the time, but maybe bring it up later and figure out what's going on or why something didn't go the way that you thought. And then if you need to redo it, just redo it.
Yeah. We're doing this because it's fun. I think we were just about to talk. Oh, sorry.
I was waiting for you to talk about betrayal.
Betrayal most foul. So we had a story arc where an NPC that you all had been sent to save and rescue went with you and helped you a little bit because her goals were to get you to trust her so that you take her to a very important special place. But then she used that opportunity to turn on you all. And I was wondering how... I mean, like, that was a big, scary arc for me the whole time because I knew that she was going to betray you. And so the whole time I'm kind of like functionally sitting across from the person that I spend the most time with and love and like lying to them through this character. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts or ideas about that experience, or like how can DMs have characters that are close to the party but that ultimately betray them without it feeling cheap?
So when Eliath first met her, she didn't like her. But this NPC that we loved, it was his sister. And so, and she could help us kind of achieve our goal. And so I think it was those two things combined where we had an emotional connection because she's important to someone who's important to us. And she could help us achieve something that we wanted. Because we at that point had a shared enemy. And I think that would be one of the keys. Can they work together in something that's not just contrived, but do they have a shared enemy that could bring them together? And then after that, their roads diverge. I don't know that that's like a roadmap, but that's at least a way to to pitch it. And I think
Yeah.
the other thing was too, it was that initial dislike that Eliath worked to get over, but there were like some warning signs. So it's not like she was totally perfect the whole time either. Like it's not somebody that we would have hung out with if we hadn't had these important circumstances. And so I think keeping that in mind, where yes, her motivations are a secret, but she was still kind of like, oh no.
Yeah.
I think for me too, as a player, like that was a really important stretch of what would my character do versus me kind of thinking about or overthinking it. And so I don't know if I we leaned into one side of that too much and prevented my PC from kind of asking more questions. But at that point, she hadn't received any reason, especially after they worked together. We had no reason not to trust her other than that we kind of didn't like her.
Yeah.
And that's not the best reason.
I think too, like, kind of like people who are being manipulative do. I feel like I remember her confronting Eliath about like, it's okay that you don't super like me, but we can work together to do this thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then ultimately striking. But that was like,
dun dun.
It was something I was super nervous about because I really, really didn't want it to feel cheap because we've been with this character for weeks, like, I mean,
weeks of our lives,
of real life. Yeah. It had been days in their life. And so that really feels like a long time. I
think the other thing to do would be, because we had kind of a pause before that big combat where we had a second. I think the other thing to do, like when the PC is being betrayed, if you need to kind of, I would never tell someone to like abandon an important RP moment, but if you feel like the tension is leaving the characters and winding up on the people, it's okay to kind of take a pause and be like, is this okay? All right. And then keep going.
Yeah. And it's okay to have like negative feelings at the table because you're feeling something that your character is feeling, right? Like, that's part of what makes the whole experience of playing D&D so magical. But as long as
I think that immersion.
Yeah, that immersion. But I mean, yeah, communication, right? Like just checking in. And that doesn't just, hearing I'm not mad at you out of game, I'm mad as my character is what I needed to hear in that moment too.
Yeah. And we've been there a couple of times where
yeah.
we just specify.
Yeah.
Characters have really strong emotions and we just
totally. Do you want to get nuts and bolts for a second? Like, how are we actually running these different characters at the table? What's worked for us? How it's evolved?
Sure.
So when we first started out, as far as like playing with characters, we had you with a full character sheet with your character, and then I had sketched out a couple of notes on an index card, and that's how we did our first, player character and DMPC, and we eventually kind of like increased the level of detail by having every member of the core party have their own character sheet, and we stuck them in this like great what is it, the little clear
like a binder with the see-through sheets.
Yeah, and so like we could do like a wet erase marker and mark spell slots and things like that, and we would just we would like flip through 3-4 full character sheets at a time. And I would say like we kind of took it simple and then we made it more complicated and more complicated. And then we ended up in a different campaign backing down off of that pretty significantly. And I think that's where we found kind of our groove.
Yeah, because the 4 sheets for me, or even 3 when I gave one back to you, because I just couldn't run 2 casters, it was too much, to the point where it was like I wasn't looking forward to combats because there were so many things for me to manage.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I've much preferred having the like my PC and somebody for them to run around, like another person for me to kind of control who or puppet. So more like the sidekick kind of concept where they have a sort of simplified stat block, and then for you to have somebody that you're in charge of.
Yeah, and so like I still get to be a player character with all the options, but it's not an overwhelming number of highly detailed character sheets, because at that point like you're just skimming the surface of what they can do, right? Like the paladin's going to be smiting every time, the rogue's going to be sneak attacking, and that's it, right? And so actually,
which is fine if that's what you want to do.
Yeah.
Because to me, I didn't really care about their mechanics. Like I wanted to do cool things with my like druid ranger, and then everybody else I need to be as chill as possible so that I can come up with cool things to do.
Yeah. I thought it was just interesting because we messed around with so many different ways of doing it, and we ended up on something that was only very slightly more complicated than we very first started. And that's been the most fun for us.
Yeah, because you gave me a little post or the little note card with just simple things to do. For me as a DM, I don't know if my preference, because sometimes with Evelyn and Tales of Eldora, I feel like I'm not using her to her best advantage, because I've been thinking about the mechanics for my different creatures and the scene and the different characters instead of what is she going to do in this particular situation. And they leveled up so fast too that I didn't have time to kind of settle into her kind of go-to things. And so my comfort level as a DM might be for the player to have a PC and, an adventuring companion, and that to be it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's totally. I think that's the way to go, honestly. Because like I like having as a DM, I like the idea of having a full character sheet for my DM PC more than I actually like the execution of it. Because you're right, like you are trying to deal with so many different creatures and combatants and things, and you can only do so much well. Right, and playing one-on-one is so much about leaning into doing well the things that you like the most. So yeah.
And I mean, with Jack and Persephone right now, it's just the two of them. I'm really curious to see kind of how that goes. So there being two people instead of three, because it still gives that interaction. And I think almost three people works better from an RP standpoint. Because it gives the PC two different people in their core party to kind of bounce ideas and thoughts off of, which DMs lets you kind of keep the onus for making decisions on the player. Because, especially if you make the two characters, so in Tales of Eldora, Evelyn and Tessina are not usually going to approach any situation in the same way, but that lets Gareth make those decisions.
Yeah. We have the same situation in our main game with Marcone and Quindithius, where Marcone is going to, this is the path of righteousness and directitude. And Quindithius is going to be like, what if we all dressed up in exotic ball gowns and, right? And then so Eliath gets to navigate between the two. So much fun!
Yeah. So is there anything else that we want to say about these various character types? Did we have any questions from Twitter this week? And I think that we'll just table some of the, if we need to, we can table a conversation about like kind of some bumps to a PC for a future conversation.
Definitely.
Or bumps to PC and DMPC, but I think that this there's a way to kind of run this in the game so that you can be thinking about going on is really helpful.
Yeah. Well, everybody, thank you for joining us for Tabletop for Two. Tune in to catch us live on Twitch on Fridays here at 8 p.m., where we'll be talking all things D&D, especially when it comes down to duet games of D&D. Also, make sure to check Tales of Eldura, now streaming on Tuesdays at 8 for the adventures of Gareth Stosdak and his gilded gull of goodness flying across the bloodless plains over a golden motorcycle that definitely won't kill us. So I'm looking forward to seeing what you have in store for us then, honey. If you enjoyed this show,
it's gonna be exciting,
and want to support us on Patreon, you can check out our Patreon at patreon.com/GroveGuardianPress. And we're super grateful to our patrons who make our video content possible. And, check out good one-on-one adventures at D&D Duet and do all the things. Like, subscribe, follow. We'll see you next week. Thank you all so much.
everybody.
Bye.